We are seeing the scenes now in the Karnataka Assembly. Legislators on mattresses spending nights, virtually blockading the House, saying 5 sedition charges. If you don't, we know what you are up to. You are going to realize this dream of flying the saffron flag, which will end any pretenses of India being a secular, liberal country. How do you respond to this?
I think I agree with Mr. Khurshid on the point that there is no clarity with respect to the nature of this Hindu Rashtra. Therefore, at this stage, to speculate as to whether a Hindu Rashtra, as it stands in terms of what it is meant to be or what they want it to be, will it translate to an anti-minority bias? I really don't know what is the basis of this particular conclusion. Two, I think when you mention or when you speak of a Hindu Rashtra, we have to take into account what is it that most people who have been the proponents of this particular idea, what is it that they have said? The point that has been made repeatedly is that you do not deny the dharmic antecedents of this particular civilization, and you do not try to sever its present from its past, but that does not in any manner translate to shrinkage of the rights of minorities which have been promised under the Constitution, and put faith in the fact that even when this Constitution did not exist, it is this particular land that has welcomed non-Hindu minorities from across the world who were persecuted. Therefore, first of all, I think there is a need for some kind of clarity on the metes and bounds and the outer limits of this Hindu Rashtra. Therefore, a definition is important. As Mr. Khurshid is a lawyer and I too am a lawyer, both of us know for a fact that definitions ultimately form the basis of any particular structure or superstructure. So therefore, I'm actually happy to have a discussion on the metes and bounds of this, and I think Mr. Khurshid is completely right on this particular aspect. Second, if the statements of certain individuals are to be treated as the basis for what would be the nature of this Hindu Rashtra or minority position, then I must effectively point out the statements made by several leaders from these so-called secular parties as well as by the Owaisi brothers with respect to Hindus, their beliefs and whatnot, when in fact the very integrity of the Indian state has been challenged, and effectively it's been said that you remove the police machinery and you see what happens. All kinds of inflammatory statements have been made. So if those statements don't reflect the large section of the Muslim population going by what they say, then why should the statement of a few individuals, even if they're elected MPs, translate to a reflection of what is a Hindu Rashtra? So I don't think you should use the worst of, let's say, examples from each side to understand what is the same position with respect to each side. If you're asking for sanity, then you ask for what is it that the average Hindu says with respect to this, what is it that the average Muslim says with respect to this. As long as these metes and bounds of the discussion are not clarified, I think it's easy for us to trade statements made by each other. I can cite 10 different statements and he will cite 5 different statements, and ultimately what are we left with? The discussion doesn't move forward. The core issue is this. One, why is there a need for a discussion on Hindu Rashtra? Why does it start? And is it recent? Two, what is the potential shape or prospective shape of this Hindu Rashtra? Three, from a constitutional perspective, what would it actually translate to? What would it have? What would be the direct bearing of this particular issue or this particular phraseology or this particular mindset on what we know as secularism today? In this regard, I'll just make one point and I'll leave it for you to take it further. If you look at the history of evolution of secularism in Europe and in every other place, it has never required any of these countries to give up their Christian identity or their own religious identity. Secularism, when followed in Europe, United States and every other place which happened to be the mothership, so to speak, of this particular construct, have been very clear that while we clearly identify ourselves to be either a Christian nation or a Protestant nation or a Catholic nation, we promise that we will give equal rights to others who do not subscribe to this particular denomination or this particular faith. So secularism is actually what is known as Christian secularism. Therefore, when they speak of a Hindu Rashtra, my assumption would be, and since I can't be the spokesperson for anybody else, based on what I've read so far, the ideologues of this particular point of view have specifically said it would effectively translate to a Hindu secular state, which means we will not sever the roots of this particular land and the identity of this particular land from the present. At the same time, we will treat everybody with a certain degree of respect and at par with each other as far as the law is concerned. To that extent, in principle, I genuinely don't see a problem. But if the idea is to say India and therefore Bharat should effectively give up its entire heritage, its civilizational heritage, that I think would be a stretch, because it takes forward whatever we have suffered for the last 1400 years or 1500 years. That may not be right. Every culture and every society has a right to assert its core identity, but that does not need to come at the expense of anybody else's identity. But if someone else believes that the assertion of the native identity is necessarily anti-particular group, then they have to really ask themselves, why have they positioned themselves in such an adversarial position or fashion as far as the native identity is concerned? That's a question for them to answer, not for the majority to answer.
Okay. Very quick, Sai Deepak. Yes.
So I'm happy that there is an admission from a senior member of the Congress party that Hindutva per se is not evil and that it is acceptable. It is distortion of a particular ideology that he has a problem with. I don't think I can have an issue with that particular position at all. After all, any position when distorted and taken to its extremes is certainly not acceptable. But this concession that's been made by Mr. Khurshid, I think it's worthy of taking note of, and I'm thankful for this particular concession. Now, coming to the second issue, why is it that when we speak of, let's say, Indian civilization, or let's say the treatment of minorities in this country, there is never a discussion with respect to the Parsis, or for that matter, the Jews of this particular country? There is only one good reason for that. What is it? They too follow an iconoclastic, monotheistic faith system or a worldview. However, they have managed to blend in as far as this particular country is concerned without losing what belongs to them essentially and what makes them different. Nobody in this country prior to the Constitution or after the Constitution has ever insisted upon their conversion to Hinduism if they have to be accepted as part of this particular society, to say when you're at your most vulnerable and you've been kicked out of your countries, when you come here you have to turn Hindu. Nobody ever insisted on that. That is the fundamental nature of this particular civilization, which means what? You don't need to give up what belongs to you, but as long as you show a tendency or a propensity to live with others, then there is no problem and you become accepted as part of this particular civilization. Now, the problem with Mr. Khurshid's proposition, and here I would certainly request that I certainly deliver a copy of my book to him, because scholarly speaking and scientifically speaking, as well as from a humanities perspective, his position is completely wrong. Every school of humanities, when it starts asking what is the native identity of a particular society or a culture, has a specific cutoff period. So for instance, when you ask Latin Americans, what is the core identity of these countries and cultures in Latin America, they identify prior to 1498, so to speak, before Christopher Columbus effectively set foot on that particular soil and started the process of evangelization of Latin America. In Bharat, therefore, to say that there is a cutoff period to identify what is the native identity of this particular country is not wrong. However, what would be wrong would be to say those people who subscribe to these faith systems which do not emanate from this particular land or do not originate from this particular land should be kicked out. That's a very different position to take. That would be an incorrect position to take. However, in order to accommodate someone who's come to this particular land, whether through peaceful means or violent means, ultimately their successors and their, let's say, descendants, so to speak, are here. You wish to accommodate them without giving up what belongs to you. Now, therefore, it is Mr. Khurshid's position that 52 Islamic countries can have a Muslim identity, over 100 countries can have a Christian identity, but somehow a Hindu majority Bharat with a Hindu civilizational heritage is not entitled to the basic right of the assertion of its identity. This, according to me, flies in the face of logic, as well as flies in the face of equal treatment of every community and identity to assert its core identity. I'm sorry to say this particular argument seems positively a weaponization of secularism to the detriment of Hindus to assert their basic cultural identity and civilizational identity. This cannot be accepted. So I am not presenting something that is clever or intelligent or cunning. I am presenting something that has been the treatment of communities and cultures across the world. And this is the logic on the basis of which you decide what is the native identity or the core culture of a particular geography, so to speak. Therefore, I'm not saying something that is outside the realm of reasonableness.
Okay, well, viewers, we've heard two sides. This debate can go on and on. we have to apply a cutoff, and that cutoff is a break. But before that, okay, Mr. Khurshid, very quickly, yes, I'll
Blacks
give you...
have no rights in America. America should go back to being a white country. Blacks have no right. And Obama should not have been president of the United States. I think this is a flawed argument, but you don't have enough time to get this to go forward. We'll have to talk another day, and I'll certainly read his book, but I think it's a completely flawed argument. I have no concern with Islamic countries. My concern is about India, and you can't talk about India in terms of Islamic countries or Christian countries.
Okay, quick response, Sai Deepak, quick response.
It's a false parallel that Mr. Khurshid is drawing. Nobody has ever said and can ever say that a non-Hindu can never occupy a constitutional position or become the prime minister of the country. That's never been the statement that's been made. I repeat, equal treatment of all communities for the purposes of all positions does not militate or is not at loggerheads with the assertion of the core identity of the land. These are not conflicting positions. These are not mutually exclusive positions. Unfortunately, it seems like Mr. Khurshid wants to treat them in silos. That's all I have to say.